one of the things that characterizes life in a most unfortunate way is that we just lose childlike joy. It's as simple as that. Little children just have so much enthusiasm for just about anything. And they manage to find a way to be entertained and be happy in ways that, that adults are just too sophisticated to do. But it isn't sufficient for us to be naive, because children are also naive. They're protected, most of them, for a long time from the hardships of living. So we can't just pretend that life is not challenging. I mean, the toxic positivity is sort of a response to that. You can't just pretend that things aren't the way they are. And so the art of real spiritual living is to be able to understand reality as it is, and then have the courage to respond to it, and then discover that reality is not what it seems, that there's this underlying divine promise, that it is the strangest thing, and I have no idea why God made it this way. If he ever asked my opinion, I would suggest it be different. But regardless of whether we like it or not, it is what we're living with. And we have to just keep seeking on an ever deeper level for what the answer is. And so beautiful melodies and light-hearted affirmations, but move all you mountains that stand in my way, nothing can stop my progress. You can see how that would give children courage at a time when they need it, but how it also answers us. And the melody and the strength of it is really there. And it can help us in times of discouragement, in inevitable times of discouragement. There's just this balancing point that we're always working with, and there's no solution for it, because we have to draw. The only thing that is stronger than the influence of this world is a connection with a higher power. Just as simple as that. If we imagine that we can sort of make it work all on our own by just getting our lives together without any connection to a higher power, it simply doesn't work. It's just as basic as that. I was remembering a friend of mine when I was going through it wasn't a trivial transition in my own self to sort of come to a more clear understanding of how to live. But in the meantime, I had just made up all these attitudes, and I was suffering in that way, and I explained the whole thing to her, what I was thinking, and in such a sweet way she said to me, "And how is that working for you?" And I had to say, "Not well at all." And the implied, which she didn't even have to finish, is, then why do you keep insisting that the world's going to change for you? Why don't you consider the fact that maybe you have to find another way to live in the world, because all those people they're just not going to reorganize themselves for me. And, this is we think that, spiritual progress is to get this personality perfectly in order. But it isn't really. It's to become less concerned about ourselves. And the only way we can really be, in a healthy way, less concerned about ourselves. The sort of unhealthy way is that, I'll just be a martyr to everyone else, which is not exactly authentic. It's like, I'm not important. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I'll just take care of everyone else. Well, if that is really your freedom, that's one thing. But so often it's just a misunderstanding that says, like this: I or you are not more important than anyone else, but nor are we less important. We misunderstand what true humility is. Yogananda had a magnificent definition of humility. He said, humility is simply self-honesty, which is to just understand who you are and where you fit in the great scheme of things. And that means that you can be as generous as you're able to be, but you can't be more generous than you're able to be, because then you start distorting the actual balance of things. You let other people take advantage of you. You are crushing your own spirit in the name of being selfless. And so you're not really being expansively generous. You're actually just being afraid to have the courage to be who you're supposed to be. And real spiritual freedom is just to see who I am in the great mix of things, to be generous when when I'm capable of being generous, and then when I need to stand up for myself, I just stand up for myself as impersonally as I sacrifice myself. We're not sacrificing with any great sense of sacrifice. We're just, well, this is the most helpful way I can be. But you also are helpful by being truthful. And so what it is that we forget ourselves in the sense that we're just not always calculating. When I first came onto the spiritual path, when I was 19, several years before I met Swami, I was intellectual in it, and I was reading books by Swami Vivekananda, a disciple of Ramakrishna, the avatar I mentioned from the late 1800s. And I vividly remember in his book, the first book I read, there were several points that really stuck in my mind. The first was, who you are today is the result of what you did yesterday. Who you will be tomorrow is the result of what you do today. So simple. That's the law of karma. That our destiny is actually in our own hands, and we are creating it day by day. We don't realize that because we have already created so much momentum in certain directions that the mere idea that we wish to change that momentum is not enough by itself to actually shift the pattern. We have put out a certain amount of energy in this momentum. We have to put out as much energy in a new direction in order to be able to shift it. But it was the first time anybody had ever told me that my life was in my own hands, and that what I am now, I created over many incarnations, but nonetheless, every decision that I made gradually created a pattern that resulted in who I am. If I don't like it, then I have to start making a new set of decisions. And of course, added many things to it, including how do I attune to a higher, more subtle, more elevated sense of myself so that those decisions will make sense. Otherwise, we're just making decisions for I want and I fear, and therefore those are the decisions we make. The other one was, let me think what, perfect love casts out all fear, which I thought was original with Vivekananda. It's actually from St. John in the Bible. But what that told me was that the opposite fear is not courage, but the opposite to fear is love, which I've spent a long time thinking about. And the perfect love that John is presenting there is the perfect, unconditional love of God for us, not merely our love for the Divine Mother, which is how I like to think of it, but how Divine Mother loves us. And if we reflect on that, if we really realize that there is nothing we can do, no mistake we can make, no foolishness, no misunderstanding that would ever break that tie of love, then you have to ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What do I actually have to fear? Yes, we fear pain. Yes, we fear disappointment, all those things. But if at the end of the story, and this is what everyone talks about, when they leave their bodies in these death experiences, almost always, they talk about the overwhelming sense of being loved. And think about your own life. How much of our lives is just motivated by this profound, deep longing for love. Because it's planted in us. It's not like it's an aberration. We look to be fulfilled in all these other ways, but the longing itself is God-inspired. And we just have to learn very slowly, and usually by great disappointment, where that love is really coming from and what it is we're really seeking. It doesn't mean that other people don't love us at all, but they're always loving us as a channel for the existence of love in creation, and that love is freely given. And more than that, if we are unconditionally and totally loved by Divine Mother, by God, then everything that happens to us has to be in harmony with that. Now think about it. Those of you, I know many of you in this room have raised or are raising children. And you know how very often you have to thwart the will and the desire of your children, don't you? You know, a friend of mine, this was, she heard me talking about reincarnation one point, and I was talking about Masters, what Yogananda said about we're in the astral world, our material karma is coming active again, and we're going to have to take another physical body. He said when the sperm and ovum come together in sexual union between a man and a woman, there is a flash of light in the astral world, and the souls that are ready to incarnate, who are in tune with that light, will be drawn to incarnate at that point. And then he said sometimes more than one soul will want to get into that womb. And, you know, and it always sounded to me like there's a little competition, you know. I mean, I don't know what it means. Sometimes he said there'll be two or more, you know, because they'll get in there at the same time. Or it's like everybody's racing and somebody's left behind. I can't really answer it, but it's all extremely interesting to me. And you'll love this one too. Master said that if a soul sees a man and a woman that they think would be likely parents for them, sometimes from the astral world, that soul will project erotic thoughts into the room. First time I heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, giving them the opportunity to be born. There's a lot going on here that we don't know about. I have had too many people come up to me and say, well, so that's how I got pregnant. One woman who got pregnant with her fourth child, I think, she said it was like having a 100-acre wood, she said, and throwing one stone into it. So that was the probability of her getting pregnant. So when she heard this, she just said, okay. And of course, once the child was born, she said, how could we ever have lived without him? You know, he was meant to be part of the family. We didn't know we were incomplete till he showed up, but apparently somewhere he did. So anyway, so this woman, she heard me talking about all of this. She was very new to these teachings. And she said her son was by then like college age. She said when he was about 5, she had to discipline him in a way that he really didn't like. And so in fury, he, as little children do, he said to her, I hate you. You're a terrible mommy. He said like that, and then he's sort of marching off to his room like this. And then she said he could tell that wasn't enough. So he turned back and he said to her, you weren't even my first choice. Like, I'm really going to twist the knife on you. And she'd never heard of any of this until she heard me later. She said, well, honey, who was your first choice? I'm like, this is very curious. And he announced very definitely, a woman in the Philippines, but she was taken. So when she heard me tell this whole story, she said her son, who's very intelligent and capable, she said he has an interesting characteristic, which is he'll impulsively decide to do something, but he'll be halfway there and then he'll stop and think about it. She could see him heading for the lady in the Philippines, pausing for a second and somebody got in first. So, where were we? Oh, yes. I was talking about the fact that if there really is a mother who really loves us, if she really loves us, she will not cooperate with everything we want. You know, if a mother or a father, if parents always just do what the child wants, does that child grow up strong? Of course he doesn't, because we just have this fixed idea, an image that some of you have made me say before, but the child gets up and says, Mommy, from now on, I want you to understand, chocolate cake for breakfast, ice cream for lunch, and then chocolate cake again for dinner. And then Mommy tries to help by saying, honey, you're not going to grow up big and strong if you just eat chocolate cake and ice cream. The child answers, yes, I will. Just yes, I will. Based on what? Based on what perspective? Except, I want it. Now really think about it for a minute. How often in our lives, but I want it to be this way. I want this family. I want this money. I want this house. I do not want anybody I love to die. I want to be prettier than I am. I want to be less pretty than I am. I want to be stronger. I want. And then we just announce to creation, don't we? This is the way it'll be. This is the way it should be. And Divine Mother disagrees. And she just disagrees. And our argument is, yes, I will. Yes, it will make me happy. It's very, very, very difficult, which is why most people do not have a profound, unshakable faith in God, because so often it contradicts what our short-term concept of what we need is. And this is where it also gets really tricky, because when we're in the astral world, we choose the environment that's exactly right for us, and we don't choose it because, I get to have everything I want. Because what I want, when we're not all blinded by all of our desires, what I want perfect happiness, I want unconditional love, and I want to be free. But how can I be free if I'm utterly compelled by all these different ideas that just keep pushing me? This is what I want. No, not that. And what it all comes down to is fear. Yogananda defined fear as the memory of pain and the concern that that pain is going to come again. And we carry that memory. That's what makes it so hard. We carry it in our chakras, our energy pattern, that even when the body falls away, that energy pattern continues. Just think, even in this incarnation, how many times something hurt you, and we never transcended it. It just, time passed, and the intensity of it goes away, but the pain, the memory of the pain is still there. And so when anything begins to look like that pain again, we get very panicky, don't we? And we start doing everything we can to stop it. However, and this is another really annoying part of this, I say annoying in a friendly way, but this is the way God made it. How many times, if you think about it honestly, and honest introspection is part of this, do you realize if that hard thing had never happened, I never would have learned? And how many times at the end of the day do we end up saying, I'm the person I am now is because of that? Would I really have never wanted to grow? And so that's the dilemma that we're always facing. And our higher self wants to become free. Our lower self wants to have things be pleasurable and easy, and lives in great fear that forgotten pain is going to come back. But as long as we are afraid of that, we're not free. We have to run our life in ways to protect ourselves, whatever it might be, instead of just being able to allow Divine Mother to take us where we need to go. And the same is true when other people suffer. And other people's suffering is often much worse than our own. And we can't see the whole picture. We think that people are being, mistreated. And by any objective standard, many people in the world are mistreated. Innocent, helpless, war zones, all of these things. But if that soul is loved by Divine Mother and is having the experience that they must have in order to face what they have to face, in order to grow and become free, would you want them never to learn? It's a very hard question, isn't it? Would you want them never to learn? I had to face this with great difficulty when in the last years of my parents' life, I mentioned earlier, my sister lived closer to my parents, was very involved with them, but she herself had some health issues at the same time they were. So I ended up being much more needed in their care than I had anticipated. I have all this philosophy and all these things that I know. It was so sweet. My parents were always respectful of what I was doing and very respectful of me, but they didn't understand at all. I mean, they weren't interested specifically. At one point, my dear mother, I had a very easy relationship with my mother. She said, a lot of people are really impressed by what you say, but I'm not. and fortunately, it just didn't mean anything to me. Oh, I said, that's so relaxing, Like, yeah, a lot of people do care what I say. No, if nobody cares, it's so easy. And at the very end, she said, how did she put it? She said, kind of, off in the middle distance, kind of. She said, I don't know. I just like having you around. Maybe it's because of what you're doing. That's great, Mom. I'll take that. I don't need more than that. I'm glad you like having me around. But I really wanted to run their life, because I thought I could run their life better than they could. And so you can imagine how welcome that was, which was not very, just kind of, to the point of, reorganizing the refrigerator. Like way down to the nuts and bolts. And it did not create harmony in the house. Let's just put it like that. And then finally I had to realize my parents, I know it's true, of course, they've had many, many incarnations. Being my mother and my father is just this round. Maybe we've done it before, who knows. But they've spent countless incarnations, just like me, developing their consciousness. And they were high-minded people. They were lovely people, educated, intelligent, high-minded people. They didn't embrace everything that I embraced, but they had many notable qualities, positive. And they've spent multiple incarnations working on this. So where they are right now is just the next step. For me, because I've worked in different ways, where they were, was way far away from where I'm likely to end up, but it wasn't unnatural to them. It was in other words, it was exactly what Divine Mother knew they needed in order to grow. So why would I want them not to have that experience? Oh, oddly, I realized, because it was inconvenient for me. And so in the name of all this, filial responsibility, I was just trying to make my life easier, rather than really just riding along with theirs. So instead of doing that, I figured it out, and I started helping them do what they wanted to do with their life instead of what I wanted to do, really for my convenience. And I thought, well, maybe they'll suffer. Okay, do we learn from suffering? Am I really helping them? Here we go back to mother love, don't we? Okay. So and I present this as, yes, this is very challenging. If this world is run by an all-wise, unconditionally loving mother who is constantly taking us where we need to go in order to get where we want to go. She's not interfering with our lives. She's taking us where our soul is trying to get. then why are we ever afraid? Very good question, isn't it? Why am I ever afraid? You have to be authentic. You can't have toxic positivity. But still, you have to ask yourself. Once when there was some real trouble, and I was involved with these people who were really not doing well. It was in a hospital. It was a big, hard scene. I became quite just overwhelmed, and I fled from where everybody was, and I went out into the car in the night in the parking lot. I think those poor hospital parking lots have seen a lot of really agonizing scenes. So I was presenting another one. I was just sort of on the, my head on the steering wheel, just sobbing because it was just so painful. And this voice came in my right ear and rattled through my brain and came out my left ear. That's how it felt. Just like that. And the voice said really simply, could this be happening outside the will of God? My darn philosophy just, grabbed me like that. But I couldn't think how it could be. I couldn't think how that many people's karma could not be in Divine Mother's hands. And so I had to stop crying, which was very annoying because I really wanted to cry. If this is then I thought to myself, well, whatever, if this is God's will. But then I came up with a great prayer, which I highly recommend, which was, and Yogananda tells us, when you really love someone and you really trust that they love you, you're not afraid to speak your mind, are you? You know that you can just say whatever is true and you will be heard and understood. This is perfect love. So out of a confidence in perfect love, I said, well, whatever you're trying to teach them, you'd better get on with it because I'm going down here. We need it, whatever, and this became my prayer and for my parents, and I've used it countless times since. Divine Mother, whatever you're trying to teach them, whatever you're trying to teach me, you need to help us learn it, and how about soon? How about now? But it really enables you to pray for a shift in energy without giving in to the fear and the wrong thought that I know better. Swamiji also had this really beautiful way of thinking it. It doesn't always work for me because my vision is not as expanded. But he said whenever he would see people suffer, he would always think then how much more glorious then will be the day when their final freedom comes to them because of all that they have suffered in order to get here. So he would not see that you're suffering now. He would see, oh, look, they're on their way to freedom. And if people are on their way to freedom, just think like these people who climb Mount Everest and do things like that, really hard things. And my gosh, it's awful in the middle. And they tell you these terrible stories of how, of cold and wind and suffering and all these things. But they still do it because they want the end point. So with us, we know where we're going, or we need to deeply impress on ourselves where we're going. And that's the perfect love that we need. We need to have the perfect love of our goal, but even more, I think, is that we have to trust Divine Mother's love for us. I don't know why you're doing this. If you have a good relationship with your child, when the father or the mother says this is what we're going to do, the child may not understand, but the trust that you've built will cause them to say, all right, but I'll go along with you. Right? And that's what we have to build within ourselves. And we build that by experience. That's how the fear gradually dissipates. We pay attention to how many times it did work out, even when we were sure it wouldn't. You can keep a gratitude journal if you like, but one way or another, you just think about all the times that I had one idea, Divine Mother put me in another situation, and what do you know? I never would have gotten to where I wanted to go unless I went along with that. Why then do I panic at the beginning? That's what came into my ear. Could this be happening outside the will of God? Well, if that's true, then why am I so upset? Well, I was upset because people were suffering. So I said, you've got to fix this, Lord. But if you don't, I'll persevere. This is what we have to do. So, perfect love casts out fear, who I am today. Oh, yes, and this was where I started with all of this. And the last one was, don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. I was 18, I said 19 when I read that. And honestly, this is what I thought. What else is there to think about? It was like a novel thought. And it wasn't really that I was selfish, because I've never been selfish by nature. I have a generous nature. It's just the way I am. But this is the way I reacted. I was always calculating my own position, and usually calculating not for selfish interest, mostly just to see how I could have more fun. If I did this, then this would be more fun than that. In other words, I was always aware of myself in the middle of it. And then what actually happened was I moved to Ananda village when I was not quite 24. I met Swami at the end of 22, and I was there by the time I was 24. And a month after I was there, I was given responsibility for the kitchen. And at that time, it was where our guests came, and also about 30 residents of the community also lived in that part of our community, and nobody had their own kitchen. So all the residents took their meals, and all the guests took their meals. And first I was an assistant, and then in the middle of the night, the woman who really knew how to do it left. She had a family emergency. She drove away. So I'm suddenly in charge of this kitchen. I was a terrible cook, but that's a separate issue. The poor soul suffered a great deal, but I was energetic and willing. And I had one assistant, and God bless her, she wasn't really quite all there. So she was kind of like a very sweet girl, but not super competent, and me. And we had 3 meals a day, 6 days a week. And on the 7th day, I would take everybody's laundry into the nearby town, and I would go do 20 loads of laundry and then fill the truck up with supplies for the following week. And I was very strong, and these 50-pound boxes, and then I'd drive the truck back. And anyway, I did this for months and months and months. And I had no time to think about anything except cooking and shopping and cleaning and on like that. I'd never been happier in my life. And actually, when I really realized what was happening, some woman came up to me and said, "How are you?" like that. And I went, "Who? Me?" And it was really like energy was suddenly directed to my well-being, and I realized that I had just forgotten about my well-being. And it wasn't that I had suppressed myself or in any way disrespected myself. I was just having so much fun doing what I was doing that I was just a flow of energy, having fun. There was no self that was always wondering, calculating its own position. And I thought, oh, this is, because when I had read that in the book, it sounded good, but I remember trying to not think about myself literally. I remember trying by projecting my mind outwardly and inwardly having a dialogue. Oh, yes, there's a boat, there's a river, there's a building, there's a crane, just to change the tape. Because the tape was, what does that boat mean to me? What do I want from the river? How, do I like cranes? It was always referenced back. But I realized that what are we anyway? We're just a flow of energy. Think about it. We're not a fixed entity. We are whatever we're concentrated on at that time. And so who do I want to be? It's what I concentrate on is what we become. And I accidentally discovered, because I was having so much fun, that just in taking care of all these people and feeding them, cooking is great because it's so concrete. It's just right there in front of you. You make it, you put it on the table, they like it or they don't, boom, it's over. There's no great abstraction, there's no philosophical issues, it's just they like it or they don't. Then we're on again to the next thing. It's perfect for just learning this. You just become the flow of energy. And from that I just learned, oh yeah, energy can either whirl in a self-concerned pattern, or energy can just flow. I mean, eventually I learned to be a very good writer from the same, I say that because I was just reading my own book during the break. And I thought, wow, that's really good. I mean, I knew it was. I wouldn't have stopped working on it until it was good. But it was more like when I wrote, especially Light Bearer, the last one, but actually all of them, I discovered you can just be a flow of energy. And a flow of energy serving, a flow of energy loving. And then it's not about suppression. It's not, and it's not about I'm not getting what belongs to me, because the flow of energy itself is who you are. So don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. It's very interesting. And in spiritual life, sometimes we also think, I make this personality perfect. And it's really hard to make your personality perfect. Now, don't get me wrong. This doesn't mean you don't face and resolve the issues that come up. But they come up more in the context of, as my energy flows, then parts of my karma, I become aware. We increase the flow of energy, through the center of ourselves. And then all the little bits and pieces of karma get drawn into that and are presented to us. And at the time we need to know it, and at the time that we're able to face it, it comes to us. And then we can deal with it like we deal with everything else. Oh, it's a flow of energy. This is what I have to work with. And I'm not less important than anyone around me, so if now this is what I have to face, okay, this is what I have to face. It's not always pleasant, it's not always easy, but there's nothing fixed about us. Just when we really finally get this, the only difference between a terrible criminal and a great saint is the way they behave. The only difference between our being happy or unhappy is what we're concentrating on. So spiritual life is just a constant. What am I concentrating on? This is where meditation really trains us to just simply concentrate and not be distracted by everything that's going around, having the discipline and the will to be able to do that. And what we think about, it's not our big reactions that really determine our lives. It's the many, many, many smaller responses. Because all those little small responses create a pattern, and then that pattern just keeps drawing us back into it. And we don't make changes generally by giant shifts. We make changes little by little by little. And then a few years later, I was told it was the Dalai Lama who said this, but I don't know for sure. He said, if you ever want to evaluate your own spiritual progress, he said, never think of a time span less than a decade. Isn't that interesting? Think of yourself not yesterday, but now and 10 years ago, and see if you've changed. Because that's how real change takes place. We transform ourselves. We don't just have one giant jump over here and then come back. And if you're different than you were 10 years ago, then keep on doing what you're doing. That's what's really required. All right, my friends, any questions? I don't really accept that the heart is more intelligent than the mind. I know people say that because I think it's confusing. It's not that it's not true. Let me put it this way. So let's start with that. Everything has to be balanced, and reason and feeling have to be balanced. If we just go with feeling without reason, oftentimes we make very foolish mistakes. So if there's too much emphasis given to how important the heart is, what we really have to do is we have to make them equal partners in what they do. Swami Vivekananda had the most brilliant mind I have ever encountered. And I don't mean because he was intellectual. He was just wise. And he could often look at situations and see solutions and understandings that none of the rest of us could see. And I puzzled what made him so capable. And his posture when he was younger, very straight spine, and he was sort of like this. And when you looked at him, it's like his heart was just a little ahead of his head. And I've always been a little left brain oriented, so I tend to lean like that. People who are a little too brainy, they always push like that because they need to have the heart protected, even if sometimes they get like this, because they need to just make sure that the reason is ahead of the feeling. But reason without feeling can be very foolish, because it just analyzes without any sense of what's actually going on. And the feeling part of ourselves is also what makes us intuitive. And intuitive is when we just know something is true. And it just comes to us that it's true. We don't arrive at it by adding up the facts. But a very interesting fact about the way Swamiji would work, most of what he did was intuitive first. He just knew it was true. But he always then was able to build a bridge to reason. And when he would explain things to us, he would not say, oh, I have an intuition, this is how we should do it. He would say, this seems like a good idea, what do you think? And then he would tell us why it seemed like a good idea. And what he was trying to say was, just because intuition can transcend reason does not mean that intuition is unreasonable. You see the difference? But here was very simple, what I finally figured out. Reason follows feeling. This is an aphorism of Yogananda's. If we're prejudiced in a certain way to see things in a certain way, we will always find reasons for it. If we think, for example, that people are inclined to be unreliable, then no matter the people around us, we'll always be seeing reasons why they're proving that they're unreliable. Even if they tell us that they mean well, that they didn't mean it, if we're biased to think that people are untrustworthy, we will find reasons why they're untrustworthy. And if we're inclined to trust people, then we find reasons why to trust them. You know how it is if somebody's depressed and negative about life? You can be in exactly the same circumstances with them, and they will find countless reasons to be unhappy, and you will find countless reasons to be happy, because reason always follows feeling. So what I realized with Swamiji, quite simply, he was afraid of nothing. He was absolutely fearless. And as a consequence, he never had to prejudice his perception of anything, because he didn't have anything to protect. He simply wanted to know what was true and what is, and he would make decisions accordingly. And as a consequence, he could look at any situation, he would just see what was actually happening, and then could often make very wise conclusions from that. Whereas I, and most of the people I knew, were always protecting something. You know, protecting my own incompetence, protecting my karmic memories of things that might happen, protecting my anxiety over this or over that. I had a tremendous desire to be listened to, you know, to be respected. I mean, for me, it's like, you can say anything about me, but if you have to listen to my ideas, if you don't like my ideas, that's when I really get upset. I mean, if people actually are going to not follow them, I could be, I put it in the past, absolutely panicked. I finally realized that I had something I called the panic survival response, which was when people were not listening to me, and my voice would get higher and higher in pitch and faster in speech. And I finally learned, when I sound like that, whatever I'm doing is crazy, stop. And so I would stop, and that was how I began to break the habit, because it wasn't a question of my heart being open, it was that my heart was so filled with fears that anything that threatened me just put me nowhere. But I used reason. I mean, like, there's no reason for me to panic, and I was not able to master the actual issue, but I could tell when I was completely out of my center, because I started talking like this, and this is what I sounded like. Heard that voice, stopped. Okay, this is indirect answer to your question, because if your heart has fear in it, you don't want to open it, because what might happen? So there has to be a cooperation between what we understand the actual nature of life and the prejudice that the heart is offering us. I was with, I was with Swamiji at a big dinner table. It was in my own home, actually. We had this very big table because when Swami would come, there would often be a big crowd. And they were talking about a project that had to do with book publishing, and there were certain ideas being offered, and I had what I thought was an intuition, which I just had this great idea that I thought would be really helpful. But there were all these, as it happened, a lot of big men in the room, and they were all talking over each other, and I couldn't get my idea in, even though I was sure that it would be helpful. Turned out it wasn't a good idea, but I didn't know that. And finally, just as a joke, I said really loud in this voice, "Listen to me, listen to me, listen to me," and, just to get them to be quiet so I could speak. And they stopped. Swami was sitting right next to me, but with complete seriousness. He said, "Asha, we always listen to you." Like that, like I was just being goofy. But of course, sometimes we reveal ourselves even when we don't know it, And then all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, how much of my life have I spent just trying to get people to listen to me? And why? Why? Because people do listen to me. Why am I always fighting for something? But this, again, it was all about the heart. But it wasn't just a question of opening my heart. It was, why is my heart so protected? That's the real question. And the answer is always fear. And you can't just counteract it. That's where you have to use intelligence. The word isn't even reason. The word is intelligence. It's feeling and intelligence is the balance. And feeling can be very, very wise, and also it can be horribly misleading. So we have to use our intelligence in between. What is the likelihood of this? I'll give you some short one. My family was Jewish. I was raised in a Jewish family, born in 1947. So you can imagine everything that happened in the Second World War was a big story. I used to always expect that I would end my life in a concentration camp. It was just I thought everybody felt that way. I only recently found out they didn't. And I was a little bit afraid of it, more than a little afraid of it, but it was also just like part of my many, many things in my life would be in reference to when I'm in the concentration camp at the end. Not very long ago, I'm talking to a friend of mine, and we're talking about this, and she says to me, at that point, "You're 75 years old, you're a white woman living in California, like, what are the statistical chances that you'll end up in a concentration camp?" And I just looked at her, and then I started to laugh so hard. We were walking, I had to sit down on the curb, I couldn't even keep walking. Like, what are the chances? And then I also said, and more than that, if I'm arrested now, they'll just shoot me because I'm useless, So I won't ever have to worry about it. Dead, I don't mind, just like that. But it was really interesting to me because that had been a part of my heart for decades. It was just always somewhere in there. And finally she applied reason and intelligence to it. What are the chances? Now, of course, I was waited till I was 75. But still, how to open your heart is to ask yourself, why am I afraid? Because you can't force it. You have to say, why am I afraid? And then, why am I afraid of that? And then when you say, well, of course, because, no. Why am I afraid of that? Where is Divine Mother's plan? Why am I afraid of that? So every time, a fear comes, you just have to and it's a long, very slow, very steady process, because you can't make yourself safe. As I could with the concentration camp, but most of the time, you can't make yourself safe by saying it's not going to happen. Because it could. Even now they could still take me to the concentration camp. But seriously, why is this one not going to hurt me? If all the others have hurt me, well, what if it does? At one point in facing fear, which has been a big story in my life, I finally realized I'm not really trusting anything outside of me. I'm trusting God on the other side of it. I'm trusting that Divine Mother is in charge, and if this person disappoints me, or if this is taken from my life, or if this happens, what I'm trusting is Divine Mother on the other side of it. That's how you open your heart. You have to open your heart because, where did we start? The perfect love casts out all fear. And nothing else will, actually. One of our wonderful devotees at Ananda Haridas, he was very, very clever. He was in Bangalore for the last 20 years. Now he's back in California. He invented something he called Spy Dog, which was an acronym, and it was solving problem in direction of God. And which was, instead of just getting a small solution, like, well, I'm afraid that I won't have a home, well, so I have all this money in the bank and all of this. I'm afraid that I won't be loved, so I've got this person, and I've made sure, and I've had all these children, and I'm raising them to take care of me, just boom, I'm going to get it all set up. Instead of trying to solve the problem on that level, you solve the problem by saying, would Divine Mother ever do something with me that was not in my best interest? And you can't always go all the way to that, but if you can go in that direction, and try to solve it on the level on which the fear lives, which is, you think you have any control over your life? Get over it. Really, look at wars, look at things that are happening even now. A friend of ours, a gas something in their house blew up. And then in the middle of the night, basically there was a huge explosion and the roof came down on them. It was not a happy moment. And my friend said as soon as that happened, he thought nuclear war. That was the only thing he could think of, nuclear war. And, only a few people are still living who were in Japan when those bombs were dropped. But how many of us know that it's not going to happen? You think we have any control? Get over it. And your heart knows that. So you have to face into it instead of trying to protect yourself from it. It's not a very cheerful prospect. That's why there's so few people who want to think this way. But the portable paradise, just to refer to it, is when we realize that what could possibly separate me from Divine Mother? Death won't separate you. Nothing will separate you, except if we ourselves turn away from it. Okay?